Hi, my name is Maria Reglero, and this is Unwoke Spain, where we cover Spanish politics and culture. So, if you're interested to hear analysis about Spanish politics and culture from someone who has a deep understanding of both the Spanish context but also the Anglosphere contexts, this might be a very interesting content for you because I believe that I can translate some of the nuances, cultural nuances between the different cultures. In today's episode, we are going to address the question, are we seeing the beginning of the end of woke ideology in Spain? Now, before we address the question, let me kick off saying that indeed, at the beginning of 2025, we are seeing definitely a shift when it comes to woke ideology. We've seen the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, step down from his position. We have seen Mark Zuckerberg from Meta to actually announce that he's dismantling DEI programs, he's getting rid of so-called fact checkers, and he's moving at least some, or if not all, of his operations from Silicon Valley in California to Austin, Texas. But I do believe it's too early to say that this is the beginning of the end of woke. And the reason is because this ideology is so embedded in Western elite institutions that I think it's going to take a very long time before we see the back of it. Think about artificial intelligence. I mean, if you prompt something on AI tools, you will see that the responses are very, very woke. And I also think that we don't have data on how far this ideology has had an impact or is having an impact on people getting jobs, people getting fired because of jobs, people not being promoted at work because of a certain belief system. So I do believe that it's very early to say that this is the beginning of the end. But anyway, when we think about the particular specific Spanish case, I think the fact with Spain is that it's very tricky. And for those of you who follow content exclusively in English or who have not been paying attention to what's happening in Spain, you may have thought that we have been very much untouched by this ideology, the ideology of woke or wokeness. But nothing is further from the truth. Indeed, here in Spain, we've seen that the poster child of woke ideology has been gender identity ideology, trans ideology. We do have a self-ID law that was passed in 2023, despite feminist pushback and pushback from medical professionals, from professionals from the education sector, associations of parents, mothers that were organized because, obviously they had concerns. And their children were either contemplated the idea of having a social transition, or they had had a social or medical transition, or their children had detransition, if you like. So they were very concerned. So all these different groups of people organized, and particularly I think the feminist movement in Spain has been really relentless and has really pushed back against gender identity ideology. And even though at the time where the law was going to be passed in Spain, we did already have data coming from Sweden, from the UK, from different countries on all the negative aspects, the very detrimental aspects of this policy, it was still passed. And that was definitely something that, there was no social consensus about this law. It was very much, passed on the back door, if you like. Um, And the leader, our former Minister of Equality, Irene Montero, she led the development of this policy, of this law, as part of the progressive, so-called progressive coalition government. And I mean, we still don't know to what extent the law, the self-ID law, is having a detrimental effect, because it's only been implemented since 2023. But we do have already some data. And also, we know that the Spanish government is facilitating in the Spanish state for children to have access to puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, double mastectomies, and the whole sort of, so-called gender affirmative care. So this has been definitely poster child of woke ideology in Spain. But if we think about the former Minister of Equality, Irene Montero, she also passed a law, the only yes is yes, only yes means yes law, to address sexual violence. But, the law actually ended up either releasing or reducing the sentences of over 1,000 perpetrators of sexual violence. So if you want to think about, good intentions, the road to hell is full of good intentions. I mean, you'd have to speak to Irene Montero, our former Minister of Equality, who is now, enjoying no accountability for the mess that she's left behind. And she's getting a very fat salary at the European Parliament paid by the Spanish taxpayer. So there you have it. Now, if we think about critical race theory in Spain, that hasn't really taken off as much as in places, obviously, like the UK or the US, and that's to do with our history, with our demographics. I would say personally that I think in America, in the US, there's, a pathological obsession with race. We do not have that obsession in Spain, but we have other obsessions, like I will describe in a minute. And we don't have, our population, our Black population, our population of African descent is much smaller than in places like the UK. So although there was, BLM resonated, the Black Lives Matter movement and the George Floyd, the movement after the killing of George Floyd, although that resonated here in Spain, it didn't have the impact that it had in other parts of Europe, and certainly in the Anglosphere. So I do believe that, yes, definitely the gender identity ideology, LGBTIQ+, that has been the push of woke ideology in Spain. Now, I think it's also fair to say that actually in Spain, we already had an obsession with identity, or at least some part of Spain had an obsession with identity. We have certain parts of the country where people living in those geographies believe that they are a nationality rather than, a regional identity within Spain, or that you can be both Spanish and Basque, or you can be both Spanish and Catalan. We do have parts of Spain where, this sort of identity politics was already on steroids before we got woke ideology. So woke ideology, what it did, and particularly pushed by hard left separatist parties in the Basque Country and in Catalonia, is to amplify this idea of this intersectional framework of oppressor and oppressed, where the Spanish government and Spanish people are the oppressors, and and Catalans and Basques are the oppressed. So that's in a nutshell. I'm not going to go today into much of a detail, but if we try to address the question that are we seeing the beginning of the end of woke ideology in Spain, I definitely say yes, but no. Because, first of all, we have woke in government. We have woke ideologues in government. And the president is somebody that's quite happy to negotiate with anyone to remain in power. So whether it's woke, separatism, or a mixture of both, he's quite happy to sign up for it. So we do have woke in government. We do have a so-called progressive coalition government, and a lot of the people that are in the government are actually very, very woke. So that's one thing. Then on another hand, we do have the policies. Like I said, we have, for example, self-ID, and we have it at both national level, but also in autonomous communities. It's going to take a very long time and somebody very brave to sort of undo all these, bad policy that is creating so much havoc. On the other hand, I would say that, the reason why probably it has taken just a bit longer in Spain to wake up to woke ideology compared to countries in the Anglosphere is that here we have a very recent history of, far right. We did have 40 years of dictatorship, and we are a very young democracy compared to countries like France or, Holland, and so the Netherlands. And so for me, I think that not everyone, we cannot generalize, but we can say that pretty much people in Spain are very attached to, or have been very attached to, the labels right wing, left wing, and very sort of much defensive of the corner in that sense, if you know what I mean. And I think it's taken a little bit of time and perhaps a little bit longer to for people to wake up to the fact that this is about, the elites against the people. It's not about, being left or being right. And I do think that a lot of course, conservatives or libertarians have been perhaps more outspoken about woke ideology and also the feminist movement. But I do think that within the left, um, some people have been just very, very quiet about it for different reasons, perhaps to keep their jobs, perhaps they don't care, perhaps they believe in woke ideology. But I also think it's because, you know, this very deep sort of attachment to being left and not being seen as something to do with, I don't know, the dictatorship in Spain or things like that. So that's play a very, very important role, I would say. Now, another very specific aspect is that I do believe here, if we talk about, for example, the online community, content creators, journalists, so on and so forth, there's been a very deliberate attempt, I would say, a very deliberate attempt for the last few years to conflate woke ideology with feminism. And I think that's made us waste a lot of precious time to actually, because, feminism and woke ideology, they're complete opposite. And just because our former equalities minister and her sort of entourage, just because they self-identified as feminists, the policies that they have implemented, their narratives, they're clearly not. I mean, she's thrown us under the bus big time. Her and of course the president of Spain, under the supposedly most feminist government in the history of Spain, they passed self-ID laws. They passed the only yes means yes law, which, reduce or gave or amnesty to perpetrators of sexual violence. So we're talking about somebody that identifies as a feminist, or groups or organizations that identify as feminists, but they don't share the feminist agenda. And I do believe that within the conservative, libertarian, and other commentators, this is a situation very much we're going to throw the baby with the bathwater, if you know what I mean. Because at the end of the day, Spain is still a very sexist country. And I do think that, of course, a lot of all these content creators, most of them, they do know that all these people, Irene Montero and all her sort of crowd, they know they do not represent feminism. They know they're woke ideologues. And yet they have completely used them all the time to say, look, this is what feminism is doing to society. This is what feminism is doing to Spain, to conflate both woke ideology and feminism. Anyway, I think I'm rambling a little bit, but what I'm trying to say is that we haven't had a more serious debate like I've seen, for example, in the UK, where yes, some people would blame feminism for whatever is going on in the country because hey, this is something that, you know, feminists have always been blamed for a lot of things. They've always been used as a scapegoat when something doesn't go right in society. When feminists do good policies, somebody else takes the credit for it. So we know about this. This has always been the case. However, this is a very specific moment in history where I do believe that it's important to have a very serious debate, very clear definition and understanding of what we're talking about when we talk about woke, when we talk about feminism, when we talk about liberalism, and so on and so forth. So I do believe that we have wasted precious time to have interesting debates just because, you know, the online sphere in Spain tends to be the commentators, the anti sort of woke, they tend to be very much conflating feminism with woke ideology. Now, there are many other reasons. I think also trends, when America, when the US sneezes, we tend to catch a cold. So, but you know, things come to Spain always a little bit later, sometimes much later. And I do believe that, for example, we haven't had really a very much a culture of DEI. I don't think DEI would make such a huge difference in a context like Spain because nepotism is rampant here. We were never a meritocracy in the first place. So I do believe that, you know, the DEI has had an impact in the US where, for example, the US, even though it's not perfect, it has more of a, you know, meritocracy lens when it comes to, you know, certain sectors of the job market. But we don't have that in Spain. And therefore, I don't think that's sort of comparable, if you know what I mean. But in corporations that want to follow some kind of Anglo-Saxon model to HR, I think in Spain some of them are catching up very late because I do see sometimes they're advertising positions for DEI advisors. And I think, well, in the US and in the UK, you know, people who work on HR, they have realized that these policies, these plans, they actually create a lot of problems in the workplace. And so why would you want to sort of replicate something where there's already, you know, growing evidence that it doesn't create, you know, actually an inclusive workplace? What it does is creates a very sort of divisive workplace, and it creates inequalities, and sometimes you might be even breaking the law. And yet here, I think the private sector, the corporate sector in Spain might not be so tuned up with what's the latest developments or studies that have been done on DEI, and therefore they're trying to sort of adopt it. So that's very much the private sector. The public sector in Spain is all about nepotism. So I don't think, I mean, even if they got a DEI policy, it's just ticking the boxes to put people in places according to political affiliation, friendship, family, friends. It's never going to be as it were in the US, originally at least, to try to sort of rebalance some of the demographic inequalities. If that was the original idea, I sometimes have doubts myself. Now, what else do we have? I have a few notes of other things. Well, we're part of the European Union, so we're basically, yes. I think that in the European Union, despite changes, We have the green policies, we have the gender policies, gender with regards to LGBTIQ plus and gender identity and trans and non-binary rights and all these things. So I do believe that being part of the European Union is only so far we can go. And what else? Oh, another very interesting thing. In Spain, we are a quasi-federal state. So our autonomous communities, they have a lot of autonomy. And so we have, we would have at central level, we would have policies, but then we have policies and plans at regional level, at local level, and I do believe that it's going to take a very long time to undo some of the bad policies that have been put in place. And also, even though we haven't had the sort of called critical race theory, but yes, the queer theory has been very much mainstreamed in education, in different departments. Whereas we cannot really talk about a critical race theory as we would in context of the US or the UK. One thing is true is that, the decolonial lens is trying to be, the government is trying to push that, very much. And I think that the hard left separatist parties are very interested in the decolonial lens to be sort of shuffled down our throats, if you like. So this is very much, it's a bit messy. It's my first video in English for the channel. But you get my drift. There are similarities, there are differences. But I do think it's going to take a little bit longer for those reasons mainly. We tend to catch up later. We still have them in government. Who is going to undo the policies? We have this quasi-federal state. And one that is particularly very much something that worries me is that I think there is a real intentionality to conflate feminism with woke ideology and to blame feminism for all the bad policies, all the bad decisions, the narratives, and all the divisions and cancellation that's been going on for the last few years in Spain, which I think is very unfair, very disingenuous, and something that can really be confronted with data. The feminist movement, the women's movement in Spain, they've been collecting and documenting data about what's been happening since Podemos, Unidas Podemos, the hard left party, took over the Ministry of Equality. And we have data from other ministers as well, including data on budgeting and what the money that was supposed to go to ending violence against women, policies, plans, and strategies and initiatives sometimes was spent on the whole trans ideology shebang. So there you have it. There's so many things going on. I do believe that we tend to look at what's happening in other countries. Here, of course, the main concerns for Spanish people are the housing crisis, the cost of living crisis. We can no longer afford the Mediterranean diet. Everything is so expensive. You go to the supermarket, to the market, the prices are crazy. I think one of the concern people have is, integration in relation to immigration. And I think there's a very, very big debate there. And people tend to talk about woke ideology in relation to immigration, and they're seeing what's happening in other countries, what's also happening here. But unfortunately, we had already a lot of vices. And I think woke ideology has shifted the terms of debate in such a way that the whole obsession that was there with identity has been amplified, and now is even taking a different turn where, with very nativist and very sort of us versus them narratives and very little constructive discussion to shift and to improve the situation of Spanish people. I always say it, this is not about left or right, this is about the elite versus the people. And I think in Spain we need to unwork. Otherwise, we will be continue to suffer, the cancellation, the stupidity, the incompetence, the virtue signaling, the luxury beliefs, and all these things that have been so detrimental to a country that was already not in a very good place. So these are my 2 cents about this conversation. I hope you enjoy. If you have comments, if there are other things that comes to your mind, if there's something that you want to criticize, discuss, whatever, please share your ideas. And before I go, just very clear, I want to say I adhere to the definition of woke of Professor Eric Kaufman. Eric Kaufman has coined the definition that woke is an elite ideology that sacralizes minorities. I hope you enjoy this episode. I hope to see you soon. Leave your comments and please like and subscribe. And don't forget to stay unwoke. Bye.